So anyway, what we have here is a very big situation. Now, let me say and suggest this. This is certainly not the be-all and end-all of analysis, but there are probably more than a few people who wouldn't mind at all if India and Pakistan had a limited nuclear exchange and Pakistan was shredded by the Indian military and subjugated and turned into a semi-agrarian, rural, pacified country without nuclear weapons. We'll leave it at that. Let's see what Webster has to say. Go ahead.
I think we have to focus on Pakistan as a strategic partner of China, because remember, the target is really China. Pakistan is targeted because there's this long tradition of friendship with China. Remember, in the Sino-Soviet split, India went with Russia, Soviets.
Right, still
but
are.
Pakistan went with China, and this is very strong and very deep. And we'll look at it. But first, the question of the U.S. and India, because this, in order to set the stage for this false flag monstrosity, this butchery that they just had, you got to remember there's this U.S.-India nuclear accord, and that was finalized in the month of October. In other words, during the hurly-burly of the U.S. election windup, the U.S. and India signed essentially a treaty. This guy Singh came here to Washington to sign it. It was passed by the Senate. It had been passed by the House. Bush was supporting it, the Indian government all for it, and this went through. And it essentially means now that the U.S. is going to cooperate in nuclear affairs with India, even though India refuses to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And U.S. law had previously said you cannot cooperate with anybody who's not under the Non-Proliferation regime. So the idea, of course, is that if you're a good power and you like the Anglo-Americans, the way India seems to now, then you get special privileges. But if you're a bad power like Iran and you don't get along with the Anglo-Americans, then you get hit with sanctions. But this is much more now. This now adds 1 billion people to the cannon fodder, to the expendable kamikaze puppet list of the U.S., the British, and the Israelis. And
absolutely.
It's huge, because now we go from U.S., Britain, Israel against the world forever to U.S., Britain, Israel, India, which is now a very different proposition. And, of course, India is going to be pushed into the front rank while the other three stay behind and lick their wounds, and the Indians do the fighting and the dying. And I would urge anybody who is a friend of India, this is an act of incalculable folly. The British used to call this the continental dagger. The British would always try to have one important land power in Europe that was working for them, meaning fighting, dying, and being chewed up for them for very little recompense. And now we have on the Eurasian landmass a continental dagger for the Anglo-Americans, and now this is India. There had, of course, been significant resistance against this. There was an Indian Communist Party, which is a serious proposition, or at least it was. They were pro-Soviet, anti-U.S. They didn't like this at all. They could see that their sovereignty was being undermined by some of the provisions of this U.S.-Indian nuclear deal. But they were beaten down. However, the opposition was still important enough to merit these terror activities as a means of beating them over the head, right? You can imagine now if you're somebody in India who says, I think this deal with the U.S. is no good, you're going to be beaten over the head in the same way that you were here if you said 9/11 terrorism was a big fraud. Now, the other side of it is Pakistan. And again, Pakistan is an ally of China, but there's a very specific focus. Pakistan, you got to look at Pakistan as an energy corridor because it goes from the Arabian Sea, very close to the Straits of Hormuz, all the way up to China. You got to look at a map because this is a part of the world that we're maybe not familiar with. We've been looking at the Persian Gulf so much. Everybody knows every mile of the Persian Gulf, but when you get up to this area where Pakistan and Afghanistan and India and Russia and China meet, then I think we're not so sure of what we're doing. You got to get up to Kashmir and Jammu and these areas. Anyway, the idea is simply that if you start from southern Pakistan, you can go up into China, and of course once you're into China, then that's under Chinese control. There are two possibilities. One is the port of Gwadar, Gwadar. This is absolutely fundamental. It's a very large, deep water port in southern Pakistan, actually southwest Pakistan, not so far from the Iranian border. And it means that tankers, oil tankers coming out of the Straits of Hormuz, could come to Gwadar and unload, sort of like what the U.S. does with this Alaska pipeline, where the tankers go from Anchorage to the lower 48. In this case, you'd be coming out of, Saudi Arabia, whatever it is, Iraq, Iran, anything. You could unload those tankers in Gwadar. You'd have your pipeline then going up the Indus River Valley and going then into China, there in the north of Kashmir. And this would mean you would save about 12,000 miles, and you'd save about 25% just of the fuel, to run your tankers. And above all, you would avoid the Indian Navy, and you would avoid the Straits of Malacca, this area between the Malay Peninsula and Indonesia, which is this tremendous choke point, which it's going to be controlled by the U.S. and the British. The U.S. fleet, of course, is based in Singapore, not so far from the Straits of Malacca. So it would mean for the Chinese that they would be cutting their time, their costs, and above all, the risk. Because these pirates, you see these pirates off Somalia? Yeah. Those are fomented by the U.S. and the British against people that they don't like. And obviously sometimes it backfires, right? Sometimes they get out of control. Just like the Barbary pirates, right? The British used to encourage the Barbary pirates to attack everybody else's shipping in the early 19th century, right? Stephen Decatur went over and took care of them. But that's the same idea. So the U.S. and the British are elaborately not interested in these pirates operating off Somalia. The Chinese would like to avoid similar pirates that are known to operate not so far from the Straits of Malacca.
There are also pirates there were in the South China Sea.
Yeah, sure, that's what I mean. So the other thing you could do is, how about this? You build a pipeline out of Iran into Pakistan and then up into China. That would give you a guaranteed route beyond the reach of the Anglo-American naval supremacy.
Yeah, sure would. Yeah.
And you could even, one thing that was very, very much discussed was you could build the pipeline from Iran into Pakistan, and then it could branch off, one branch into China and one branch into India. And there you would have a peaceful common interest that would go beyond, what the Hindus have done to the Muslims and vice versa, and what the Buddhists and the Confucians have done to both, and all these other stories. You would actually have, therefore, a perspective for peaceful development, which, of course, Zbigniew Brzezinski does not want. He wants the opposite. He wants the breakup of these nation-states. There's even a plan for an undersea pipeline from someplace like Qatar, through Hormuz, but underwater, and ending up in Pakistan and then going up into China. So there's a lot of planning that's going on there. The port of Gwadar, which is the centerpiece of all of this stuff, just began large-scale operations this year. So there's the timing. The other element in the timing, in addition to the Indian-U.S. nuclear accord finalized in October last month, or the month before now, the question of the port of Gwadar. We've also got, on Wednesday morning of last week, Robert Gates confirmed at the Pentagon by Barkey. In other words, a Brzezinski clone. Brzezinski's office boy, the guy that Brzezinski met with every morning and every evening from 77 to 79, 80 at the Carter National Security Council. I call people's attention, it's an interesting confirmation of my own book, to the speech given by Gates at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in the presence of Jessica Matthews, where he says, "Hey, Jessica, remember when we negotiated with the Iranians in Algiers, April 1978, and Zbigniew told them, we will continue to arm you with everything you want because our main enemies are the Soviets, and you're going to help us against the Soviets." This is pure Brzezinski back in 1978 in that secret meeting. The secret meeting is covered in Obama, the Postmodern Coup, and this speech sounds very much like a hypothetical speech I put into Brzezinski's mouth in Obama, the unauthorized biography. Now, if we look then at who is doing this terrorism, the Indian government says that it's all from Pakistan, of course. It's Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is a Mujahideen extremist group. There is no proof, first of all, no proof, and it's denied by the organization in question. They said they didn't do it. There were also reports that this thing was done by the Deccan Mujahideen, Nobody's ever heard of them. They seem to have been something made up, out of thin air on purpose on the occasion of. Now, there are 4 possible suspects in this stuff. First of all, the British. The British are obviously the main suspects in anything happening in India or Pakistan. Always look to the former colonial power, in this case a colonial power that was there for 200 to even 250 years in some parts of India. Anything happens in India, look to the British. There were originally reports that some of the terrorists were British, that they were part of this Leeds or Brixton or Finsbury School for Patsies, run by MI6.
Yeah. All right. Very good. India, of course, a long venue for Mossad operations as well, CIA as well. Everybody's over there. Let's put it that way. Back in just a minute, we'll continue our conversation with Webster Tarpley.